So what I wanted to do was to provide a quick overview of the CAT Coalition member webinar that we held last week. It was really good participation. I think at one point I checked and it was like maybe 90, different people on there. I'm not sure if like a raise of hands, like who of you attended that webinar? I'm just curious. All right, Gary did, Tracy did. All right. So we just want to provide some, a quick overview in terms of the results that we got from that. And then we did try to do some sort of preliminary synthesis analysis of the feedback. It was not by any ways scientific, but hopefully this will be, helpful. So we did the webinar last Wednesday, 68. So we did a whole sort of effort with Mentimeter to get feedback from those that were participating. You have to remember that the CAT Coalition is more of a, I would argue, a loose organization of sort of members, individual members that have an interest in this, as well as associations and organizations. It's almost like it was sort of self-selected to some extent. So we know that the feedback that we got is not necessarily representative of the entire industry, and that if we wanted to, we could kind of go out and kind of do a more formal, input feedback process. But I think we're doing pretty well so far, given the association staff who have been listening to members, to the CAT Coalition members, and then you as the ETF members as well. So through the Mentimeter survey, we had over sort of 328 very accurate pieces of unique feedback of data, and we are still combing through that, I would say. But it was great feedback, and it was. From a structured standpoint, some of them were sort of open questions about, what do you see as the purpose? What do you think of this proposed purpose statement? Others were like the question you see here on the slide. It was more forced, where you rank these type of things. So put them in first, second, third, fourth, rank order. Other ones, we had a couple questions with your standard dots. The 100 points, I guess, is the electronic way of doing this, and then assign those 100 points to different categories. I forget exactly what the questions were, but we tried to sort of mix it up in terms of the type of feedback. And if you know anything about Mentimeter, this is not tied to an individual person. We do know if a person, a participant, which questions they asked, but I don't know who that participant is. So I know that participant number 1 answered questions 1, through 8, but participant number 2 only answered question 3 and 4. So we can't go back and kind of say, hey, can we, cut this, in different ways of saying, okay, from a local organization, what did they have to say versus a state versus, private sector or something like that. That might be useful, but it's not something that we can kind of get out of the Mentimeter survey that we did. So that's just sort of a quick overview in terms of who the participants are and everything. But I think in general, it was pretty good. I got positive feedback from most of the people. I'm happy to have negative feedback as well, but people seem to have liked it, at least gotten that update in terms of what the CAT Coalition is doing. So one of the big questions was, what do we need from sort of if there were this national coalition, whatever you might call it, what do we need from that? And we try to kind of go through the results. Kristen, thanks for helping synthesize this. And here are sort of 20 different categories or topics of needs that this coalition could help address in some way. And it's, when you first look at it, you go like, well, it's kind of all over the place, right? A unified national vision, sharing of best practices. We need to have consensus. We need SMART goals. We want to continue the work of the V2I coalition, that sort of thing. So a lot of good input. And the next slide, what I tried to do was to say, hey, how can we organize these into some sort of buckets of categories, right? So that's what I try to do next. I try to take all 20 of these and kind of combine them together in some way. So that's where I had here. So this was my attempt. So blame me if you don't like it. I'm happy to, fall on the sword for this one. But I was like, okay, what are, what was coming to light for me as I started, putting things together, I just try to group the categories, and then I try to come up with what the names were to sort of name them. So we can come up with different words to to describe the categories, but this is how I grouped them. So the first one was sort of alignment. That was the word that I chose. Sort of the alignment of a unified national vision, principles, guidelines of the national framework, a national roadmap, aligned national goals, deployment roadmap. So common theme there for this sort of national vision, a unified vision at sort of the national level. The second one going down is coordination, right? We need leadership to help coordination between public and private, among Fed, regional, state, local coordination, involve other associations. So that was the sort of second bucket of, a common theme. The third one being collaboration through clarifying roles and responsibilities, align, don't duplicate efforts, consensus, cross-industry collaboration, partnering between public and private, and a forum for public and private sector to meet. So, coordination and collaboration is kind of used, sometimes I would say interchangeably, but I think that there are sort of different meanings to these words where collaboration means you're probably doing something a little bit more than you are in terms of just coordinating. But again, we can kind of think about or talk about at some point what those different words mean. And then the last one, which I was struggling with a little bit, but I was like, to me, what came to mind was like the specificity, right? There are lots of thoughts about, hey, the work of the VITA-I Coalition was really good, and they had some good things with the SPAT challenge and stuff like that, very specific deliverables that came out of it, and we could show our process, we could show the work that we did, what we produced. So sharing best practices, filling the gaps, clear deliverables, accomplishments, and I just use that sort of term of specificity as a placeholder. So just tried to sort of take those 20 what seemed like disparate needs, and just as I was looking at them, they kind of aligned around these 4 different buckets. So that was the first sort of synthesis, and then all these do come together later on, I promise.
Could I just stop you there? I want to make sure I understand Kristen's comment in the chat. It would be great to synthesize the topics under each of the 4 themes as we move forward. Which topics do you mean, Kristen?
Yeah,
and I do the 4 themes.
Yeah, I do want to say kudos to Matt for trying to put this into a framework. 2 comments I see here that I'm curious about the group is, I think we need definitions. I think people use coordination, collaboration in similar ways. So clarifying what those 2 themes or buckets mean. And then 2, what I was really saying is under each theme, there are common tactics or recommendations, right? Principles for a framework for national deployment could be similar to roadmap. If you're looking at collaboration, when I read cross-industry collaboration and partnering between public and private sectors, are those the same things? So I think this group might just need, or the task force that we support you guys all might need to kind of further look into these and see if we can't condense them into 3 or 4 real good goals.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Paula, quick, or Matt, quick question, or maybe you're getting there, Matt, so you can just be like, hey, give it a minute, Julie. I think this is a really helpful frame, and what I like is there's some different levels here, right? So like you go all the way from unified national vision down to deployment roadmap. Those are different levels of specificity within a bucket, or we have continue coalition work with clear deliverables and accomplishments. So I think this is helpful to start sorting different levels, or like vision versus like deliverables, and we're showing those, I think, clearly. And it feels like this our task force has talked around all of these issues, and that gets me to my question, which is, do you provide sort of a bit of a crosswalk from what you heard on the webinar to how this relates to what we've been talking about? Because I think, well, these may not be the same words. I feel like we've been having this conversation within the task force. We just haven't gotten it as organized, as clearly as you have done here.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, yes, Julie, hold on.
All right, good. Because I like this.
I don't know.
And just while your mind is swirling on that topic, because yes, the same words keep showing up in different forms here. But what I think is going to be the real question that we grapple with today, and need to hear what you think about the size and scope of a core CAT coalition image, what that looks like. How is the table set, And then what do others do beneath that framework so that you're not exclusive? You know, how does this all fit together? And I always think visually in terms of a table of organization of some kind, but I think that's what we're trying to refine. Is it all of the above, or is there a clear a way that certain things happen at certain levels of a future CAT coalition? Okay.
Great. Any other thoughts or comments about this one before I move on? Not trying to rush it or anything, but you can raise your hand, that helps. So then just FYI, I have 3 screens. So if I don't see the chat, it's because I'm trying to look at this screen here.
And
so
I'm watching to see the chat and look for hands as we go.
Okay. And this time when I hit the volume up and down button on my computer, my monitors don't disconnect. So that's what happened last Wednesday on me, right in the middle of things. All right, so then another question that we asked was about the benefits of a coalition. And it was separated into sort of 2 parts. One was, what's the benefit of a national coalition in general? Like, what can you get out of it? Like, if we have this, what will we get from it? And then, because we also talk about the benefits of the transportation technology and sort of, you know, what can we get from the technology? How can it improve safety, mobility, equity? You can kind of see some of those words there. And kind of, so within the, you know, what do you see from the benefits of a national coalition? There's sort of a clear distinction there that, you know, people were saying, hey, let's establish this sort of clear national vision, which aligns with the previous slide a little bit. We want to improve collaboration, which aligns with the previous slide, increasing adoption across regions. And then finally, the very specific one, 4th, provide the clearinghouse to share information, compile best practices. So those were, you know, 8 benefits that we listed, right, as part of the Mentimeter. And we just said, of these 8, you know, is this, how would you rank these? Like, what's most important, what's least important? We did have a 9th, which was the other slide, which were, there was more ideas out there, but I would argue that they were more sort of disparate. They were individual like ideas, and we haven't honestly had time to go through all of them to kind of see what they're saying. But we do have that information. So the way I kind of look at, and then we asked, you know, in 1 or 2 words or 3 words, I guess, what do you see as the benefits of the technology, of this transportation technology? So when I think about this, I think to myself, well, these actions that could be taken by a national coalition could or will or should or at some point result in these. And I was kind of thinking of these as sort of societal benefits, because the ones that really came to light here were, you know, safety, mobility, equity, reliability, accessibility, sustainability. Some were very specific to, well, like reliability of the transportation system or reducing congestion or something like that. But many of them were broader sort of outcomes of what the technology could do to society in general. So that I thought was a pretty good, anyways, I thought that was sort of interesting. Again, trying to provide some, you know, how do we sort of link these things together? So that was the idea of the benefits of a coalition. And then the next slide here, in terms of that slide, what were some common themes that we saw? So we try to sort of delve down a little bit deeper. The top 5 being, as you saw, I think in that word cloud: safety, equity, mobility, efficiency, accessibility. And then people said accessibility to, you know, different aspects: jobs, healthcare, education. We also saw, you know, other things on here, right? Sustainability, reliability, coordination at the federal, state, local, regional level, consensus, act as one voice, a thought leader. So those could be sort of benefits as well, not just the technology, but benefits of the, you know, having this coalition as well.
Are there any observations on this? The way these came out as top 5 versus others? Some of these are outcomes, others are more tactics. Does anybody argue with what they see here, or does your gut tell you that this might be out of order in some way? Okay, just checking.
Yeah. All right. And I don't think that, so I should say, I don't think these are in like an order, like a 1 through 17. I think we just numbered them. Probably should have bulletized them in some way.
The manual suggested security, which isn't mentioned here. Emmanuel, do you mean data security?
No, secure and reliable transportation network is part of why people use it, why they feel the transportation network is accessible and equitable if it's first and foremost secure. You
And
don't want to be
secure is-
robbed. Yeah.
And that's different than safety in your mind?
Yeah, safety is more of crash prevention. Security is more of the network in general. Let's say you don't want to ride mass transit if you're gonna have get sticked up or get your wallet robbed or something.
Anything else?
Matt, I just want to share something that we kind of talked about as a team, is I think for this group to think about, as we think about the vision, which you're going to share later on, does the vision focus on outcomes like safety and a more safer, secure, reliable system, or does the vision focus on tactics? There's a lot of debate on how you accomplish a vision for a coalition like this. So it's up for this group to determine, is it more outcomes based or is it more tactical?
The way our charge was written was to define the purpose of the need for an organization, and we may want to pull some of that information back up, Matt, as we're refining our words. But yeah, I think that's for us to try and arrive at. Get your thoughts on.
Oops. Okay. Sorry. Didn't mean to click.
It's almost we need to do this so that we achieve these outcomes, in my mind.
All right. So then one of the last ones that we're going to talk about initially in terms of the webinar feedback was we talked about, we have all these different technologies that we could be focusing in on. So we listed, I think, 7 or 8 of them. You can kind of see them here. So the traditional automated and connected vehicle technologies, and then we included electric, the prioritized order: electric vehicles, automated delivery, mobility on demand, micromobility, and then automated air mobility. So we weren't trying to exclude anything. So this is where people were given 100 points. It's like the old not the old, but the dot exercise, that they can put all 100 points on one thing, or they can put the 50 points on one and 20 on another, that sort of thing. So that's how the 100 points exercise worked. And basically clear consensus that the group, kind of focused in on, connected and automated vehicle technology. Now, to me, part of this has to be, you got to take it with a grain of salt, because these are, self-selected, people who have been involved in this for a long time, right? And, they're very smart, intelligent, and awesome people. But it's not like, looking outside, like an outside perspective and saying, hey, yes, you have been focusing on these 2 technologies, initially just connected because of the VITA deployment coalition. But that doesn't mean that we should keep with that focus moving forward. So I guess one of my questions is, for the group here, for the ETF, what are your thoughts on this, knowing where the participants on that webinar were coming from?
I think you already said it, Matt. You're going to get cat people voting for cat things when you survey them.
I guess I would, Matt or Paula, from my perspective, so a coalition is about bringing, or at least this is what I would think. There's a coalition is from my perspective, is like a platform where we do the things like you bring various perspectives together and you collaborate and you share. And you can also have focus areas, and I don't know exactly like what that structure looks like, but you could certainly have focus on these 2 areas. But I think if we were, or at least this would be my perspective, if we were to say the future CAT coalition would look only at vehicles, automated and connected vehicles, we have then excluded a big part of the future. Like, I don't know how, I don't see how that's an evolution. That just feels like to me a narrowing. And when so much conversation around the country and dollars from IIJA or bill or whatever you want to call it are flowing to increase mobility in all sorts of ways. So I think from my perspective, there's a difference, and maybe we could think about it this way. There's a difference between the coalition and the sharing and the evolving writ large, and then focus areas, which are absolutely appropriate for maybe more detailed sharing. But I would worry about after some of the conversations I've heard from the SCAN panel and others, if we were to have a narrow focus going forward, I think we've done a huge disservice. If the coalition's focus is narrow, we have done a huge disservice to America. If we want to be the premier coalition for advancing technology across transportation, that doesn't mean we don't have focus areas. But, and I appreciate someone talked last time about, like, if you don't focus on one thing, you never get anything done. And I wholeheartedly support that. But I don't think it has to be an either or decision. I think we can come up with a governance structure. Paula, you were talking about like something in like a visual that would help people do both. So
Yeah.
I would worry if we had a narrow coalition focus.
And this coalition itself is supported by many associations, including these three core associations who do a lot of distinct tactical and strategic work in this area. So it's the collaboration of all those efforts, perhaps, that brings it to this table platform, as you said, Julie.
And I know I've asked this question or kind of brought it up at the staff meeting parts, but I'm curious because I agree with not making it too narrow, but at the different, we purposely asked, a wide variety of perspectives here. From different perspectives, do you still, and it's not necessarily to be answered, do you still have the same level, same focus for prioritization? Is this still your priority? So David, as an MPO, is this your prioritization? Or do you have another level of prioritization? Gary, from your point of view, would this be your perspective? And I'm not really looking for an answer now. I am just curious as to your perspective on it. And like I said, I'm not looking for an answer now, so we can move on if no one wants to respond, but.
Or put your thoughts in the chat. I mean, I do think, as Matt recognized, the folks on the webinar were a very distinct subset of the people who are interested in connected and automated vehicles and have been working through the previous CAT iteration. So they don't necessarily have the be bold, think big mantra and are looking to fill the gap that they still see exists and didn't get taken care of in the last group. So I think you can't ignore that, but I do think, I agree with Julie, as we're thinking, it's to stay bold and think big until we really help define what it is we're going to be.
I think David unmuted.
I did.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just looking at Kristen's comments in the chat. I have to kind of agree. It's like we want to accomplish a lot of things, but we also have to focus. And for us, I think the connected autonomous vehicle part is definitely something that we can realize greater benefit as it's further deployed, and things we're able to do from a traffic management standpoint to addressing incidents or avoiding incidents altogether to enforcement. All of that mobility on demand is also a key focus area for us. But it's like we have all these things we want to focus on, but when you have a list of priorities, then nothing's a priority, right? And so how do we really hone in on what is a true priority and we can be successful at realizing?
Chris makes a good point of perspective that even below the automated and connected lines that are so huge, each of these others have a component of automated and connected technology that will support those efforts. So, it's how you describe what it is you're doing. The technologies versus the multimodal approach. Chris, you have your hand up.
And then Julie.
Yeah, I sort of have two thoughts as we look at the data coming out of this survey, because it's really, really interesting. Paula, I like that you reminded us of our scope as a task force, which is to, establish a purpose statement for this organization. And I always think of purpose statements kind of as like, who is our audience? What is the contribution that we're trying to make? And what is like the distinction or the outcome? And these findings are not necessarily, we shouldn't just like take them and place them into that purpose statement, but they're interesting inputs. And so I think if we focus on our deliverable and how these might serve as inputs to that deliverable, we might be able to keep that broad perspective while also considering these very specific ideas. And then the second thing I wanted to offer is like one really challenging and opportunistic place that we find ourselves in this industry is there are a lot of organizations, right? We've got CAT Coalition, ITS America, ITE. There's a lot of places to engage. And so as we're developing this purpose statement, I really think we need to think about how we're going to scope this specific coalition and its value and purpose as it relates to and complements the other organizations that are also around us. Because I think a lot of these people engage in a lot of other places for a lot of the same reasons.
Well put. So duplication is not desired, but the collaborative opportunity to bring all of these other distinct action groups together.
It's sorry, just one follow-on thought. It's almost like I would love for us to build a swim lane diagram where we sort of like inventory the organizations that may have similar or overlapping purposes. And we narrow our purpose statement very specifically on helping the broader industry accomplish that swim lane.
That's a good idea. I like it.
I think Julie was next, and
Yeah.
then Mark
Real
raised
quick,
his
I'm
hand.
not sure I can improve. Chris, I think had some helpful comments there. I think where I am struggling with the word focus is focus on, are we trying to narrow our focus of our purpose, or does focus come in later on whatever the deliverables are, right? Like you can convene conversations and have a broad coalition and serve as a clearinghouse for all sorts of things. And if you want to dive more deeply on just a couple of issues, I mean, that's what I'm trying to struggle with, is not focusing too early. Or if we do, are we just going to be a coalition of vehicle technologies? Like, right, like, so that's, I'm struggling with where the focus or the narrow comes in, and is it at the purpose or is it at the deliverable level?
Very. Mark, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think one of the things to keep in mind is just I know this is going to be discussion of today, is the makeup of the coalition, but I think that's an important thing to keep in mind here is this is one of the few groups that has the variety of different levels of government, different areas of industry together. So it's important that we focus our work on the areas where we need all that input. There's going to be minor tasks where we could have something that could definitely be done at AASHTO, where we wanted to dive down into specifics on a technical element of roadway design or wherever it might be. But this is the one few time that we actually have these groups together. We don't want to waste people's time knowing that we have limited time together, in a given year to actually get to the heart of things. So maybe it's as much as we're saying focus, maybe it's also broaden is what we're looking at here, is that the coalition's goal is to make that like high level, or maybe it's put it as foundational recommendation. And then, to Chris's point and Julie's, that's where we have these dedicated swim lanes to go there. This is one of the few groups where we have everyone together. So, areas like automation, I can definitely see, just because it takes, everyone talking together to get on the same page. But there might be areas where we might not need to have that same level of involvement from all sectors in order to have that conversation. So I think we should figure out, given the makeup of the coalition here, what do we need, knowing that, we have everyone at the table in this situation, and then go off in different directions once we have that high level set. So maybe that's the focus of the coalition.
Yeah, Julie suggests hub and spoke, like a swim lane, only it's more circular. And specific focus areas may delve deeper into specific areas, specific groups. Okay, Matt?
Yep.
Is there more on this slide?
Nope. Next slide. I think I try to bring things together.
You're ahead of us, Matt. Good job.
With the swim lane circle, maybe a lazy river. Would people
Yeah,
agree
that's
about a
more like
lazy
it.
river? That's what I like, with a nice tube and a beer. All right. So what I tried to do was to kind of bring together those sort of 3 topics that we talked about, and just sort of this is a, you see down below, this is where we're going to do the handoff between, I'm going to stop talking and Paul's going to moderate, and y'all are going to do a lot more talking. So discussion, like, what are your thoughts? So try to bring together this sort of disparate topics into, I don't know, the beginning of a purpose or something like that. But we do have like 3 drafted, purpose or vision statements that we'll sort of get into. So the idea of a national coalition that focuses on alignment, coordination, and collaboration in order to develop a national vision, advance the eventual deployment of automated and connected vehicle technologies, resulting in accelerated adoption in the short term and then societal benefits in the long term. So again, just trying to put some thoughts around this, and I will stop talking, and Paula and y'all can keep on going.
All right. So one thing that comes to mind here is the focus on certain things in order to, and resulting in, kind of reminds me, Matt, of your previous slide that had outcomes, safety, equity, mobility, reliability. So those are things I think we're going to have to define before we're done, to really understand the value, which was one of our charges of a coalition, a purpose and the value of a coalition or a national collaboration. So any thoughts on what you see on this slide? Do you want to argue with anything here? Well, we're going to talk through a number of steps that lead to the ability to look at 3 different straw versions, and we can then pick those apart and give thoughts on what we like and don't like about those. But is there anything specific about the focus area or the key areas of identifying a purpose in order to, pretty broad, not very strictly defined, but that has some results that have a number of societal benefits? Any thoughts here?
Paula, this is Gary. Just quickly, Matt, the only thing that really bothers me on this slide is the term eventual in there. I think we need just to be more firm with what we say. Eventual sounds like, yeah, someday, maybe, whatever. It just removed that word to me, and everything sounds better.
Where is it? I don't.
In the second box there.
Oh, there. Yes. Like that we're not all committed.
It sounds so wishy-washy to me. It just.
Yeah. Okay, good. To a certain point, we ought to perhaps have a fire lit under us. Kristen, you have your hand up?
Yeah, something that came up in the AV hearing at House TNI a couple of weeks ago and in DOT's innovation principles is a question for you all in this last box, this last column. Are we doing all this work to simply accelerate adoption, or are we doing this work to actually achieve some of the outcomes, like saving lives, promoting mobility, having security, as Emmanuel mentioned? And so that's just something for this group to think about. The reason that came to mind is the second bullet in the second column, advancing deployment, seems very similar to accelerated adoption. So that's just something for the group to think about.
Okay, you could read advanced deployment as almost the next step to lead to accelerated adoption nationally. But I read the resulting in the first bullet, so that you can achieve societal benefits in the long term. One has to lead to the other. But I think you're right about the specificity here. Does anybody disagree with what Kristen suggested? Don't read too much into it. Okay, well, we can move on because we'll talk more about it. Matt, you actually can talk. You don't have to just type. Okay, let's go to the next slide, because I think we really want to get you all talking about this part here, the what and the why. We got to go back to and see if we can develop some kind of consensus. One thing that came up in our staff meeting this week was the awareness that we asked John Corbin to give to us before we went down a rabbit hole on advocacy, etc., policy making, that he remind us what FACA is, Federal Advisory Committee Act, and if in fact we're leading towards an agreement with Federal Highways or US DOT, cooperative agreement for a CAT coalition, there are things we have to be aware of as we craft our statement of purpose. John, can you give us a quick overview?
Yeah, I'll keep the interjection really short, and I'll just put some links in the chat pod when I'm done. But the Federal Advisory Committee Act, I think it was in the early 1970s, was passed, basically requiring that there be rigor and accountability for expenditures of federal resources, including federal dollars and staff time, to create groups specifically to inform the development of federal policy. And in fact, IVHS America, the predecessor of ITS America, was designated as a federal advisory group. It no longer is, but it was at its formation in the early 1990s. And so to the extent that a group is proposed or would be proposed that would have kind of a more explicit active federal policy advocacy or federal policy advisory role, it's probably outside the scope of the group of people involved in this conversation to resolve that. It's certainly not beyond the prerogative of AASHTO and ITE and ITS America to consider and propose that action be taken to that effect. But main thing was we just want to make you aware of what the fact that there is a Federal Advisory Committee Act or FACA, and that it does apply to groups. There actually is still, because the website is still active, although the names are very stale, there actually is an AV FACA, US DOT created one. I think it met once, and I know John Harding is on the phone as well and was closer to the action than I was at that point in time. So main reason it came up, I think, in our staff level preparatory discussion was just as something to be aware of, not necessarily as a limitation or something that's completely out of the question to address, but it does come with kind of quite a substantial amount of rigor and cost, and to some extent, I'll say discussion constraint, should you head in that direction.
And we don't want to cross any of those lines, and be very aware of what we're proposing and how it fits with a structure of a collaborative agreement with US DOT, if in fact that's what we recommend.
Yeah, I'll add, it's the prerogative of the group to decide if it's a line they don't want to cross. I have an opinion that I'm not going to share, but it's just to be aware of the line should you get close to it, and if you decide to explore it and cross it, like I say, I'll offer some links in the chat pod as far as resources, and
it would be. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. We just raised this for awareness to make sure everybody knew this was a thing and that it's something we need to be aware of. Kirsten, it's important to note the IJA reestablished the ITS Advisory Committee directly with US DOT. Can you say more about that?
I think just to John's point, right, it's a reminder, in a lot of previous CAT Coalition conversations, this came up because people were like, well, we want to do advocacy, we want to do policy. And so John's reminder was very appropriate. And so if in fact folks continue to, advocate for that, we can just remind them that the IIJA reestablishes the ITS Program Advisory Committee, and it actually adds a couple of new chairs. So it's expanded to 25 members. So if this is important, we can have a different conversation another time about how we want to be involved in that capacity.
And I think we should know more about ITS Advisory Committee and its intersection with Conceived Future CAP Coalition, for sure. The other thing that I wanted to just raise was back to part of our original charge was the principal organizations here, AASHTO, ITS America, and ITE, are part of the supporting network. I don't know what's going on. Matt, are you moving things around? It's always been the intent that a coalition that's formed and conceived of with this group to recommend, it doesn't take the place of the three organizations and their distinct role and efforts that they work on and their missions. But as Julie was describing the hub and spoke concept, I was imagining how different parts of these groups will contribute what they already do, if that was the model we were looking at, what they already do to the table of coalition and contribute in that way. So just wanted to say that out loud and see if anybody wanted to argue with me on that. Any comments there? I see a lot of comments in the, oh, those are just the links from John.
Emmanuel raised his hand.
Emmanuel?
Hey, I'm just curious, is there any difference between public side AVCV technology like infrastructure owners and the more commercial side like you see in CAS that is on the private sector side, or is it one and the same for the purpose of this group?
Who has an answer to that?
Emmanuel, I missed the acronym that you said. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so AVCV, if you draw a Venn diagram, it has broad topics. There could be a public infrastructure side, infrastructure owner side, that the technology is there. And there's also stuff that you kind of see in like CES and consumer electronics that are on the private side, and the innovation of the Society of Automotive Engineers on the SAE side. It looks like our principal association, AASHTO, ITS American, ITE, is more focused on the public infrastructure and transit side. There might need to be a distinction between those because we don't want to stifle innovation on the other side.
Well, it begs the question, I think, who else should be invited to this table? And is that a missing gap? And should they have a seat on this coalition, whatever it's called?
I was gonna offer some perspective there. I was just waiting for the right time, but Emmanuel's question was the perfect intro to it. So in my view, ITS America can and does bring a lot of technology partners to the table, private companies to the table with automotive representation, telecommunications, et cetera, et cetera. But thinking about some of the themes that we've talked through in the last meetings, one of them is certainly collaboration. I remember a lot of emphasis and value coming out of the IOO OEM specific efforts. And so I don't know if they belong under principal associations or other associations that are critical partners, but I was going to suggest that we consider 5GAA as well as auto innovators as heavy private sector represented associations that could be here.
Auto innovators, was that what it was?
Auto innovators and 5GAA.
Okay. Okay, all good, because we'll get to that here as we get towards the who all should be participating. It's seen that the three principal associations can serve as that neutral venue for USDOT and groups to intersect. That a lot of the participants and members of these three associations belong to one or more of the others. So it's a great collaborative, both public and private area, and public at all levels, I think, is worth recognizing, as Emmanuel, you've mentioned in the past. And they also represent the stakeholders in the AVCV, that's the public agency space, and can act as the conduit for sure for funding and provide the staff support to any kind of a coalition. So that's kind of an underpinning of the understanding of the three principal organizations and their role here, not to exclude other associations for sure in participating in a coalition. So that's one of the things we want to get to today. And so I think as we get to the last two bullets on this page, can we put a pause in that and we'll talk more about that, but let's go back to the purpose statements. Matt, what's the, oh, here we are. So what we've done in the staff group was develop 3 conceptual options for discussion purposes today. And we took all the feedback we've heard from various areas, and we want to hear your initial thoughts today. If we can come to some kind of consensus and direction, great. But what we want to talk about in each of these statements is what do you like, what don't you like, and what would you change? And we'll dive into, I think where Kristen mentioned the need for clear definition. That's going to come up again as we get into these statements, but let's talk those through and get your thoughts on that.
So Paula,
Matt?
We had mentioned the charge to the evolution task force that the tri-chairs came. Do we want to do? I have it ready to go on the slide, my screen over here.
Sure.
If people want a reminder about that.
Yeah, let's just look at that.
Okay, so here it is, just a FYI.
There we go. So it's this notion of the scope of a coalition, the structure, and the membership to advance all of those things. They want us to be aspirational, to think big and be bold. And what they really are looking for, of course, is a recommendation from this group on that framework. And so we can capture all of these thoughts from you as we move forward and put a structure and purpose together. And I will say there's going to be a check-in between staff and the principal associations leaders next week. And so if we have any sticking points today, certainly that's something we can take back to them and get some feedback. If they feel like we're heading in a direction that they want to give input on, we will be bringing that back to you as well. Should we get into the statements? And when you think about these are oriented from the most, I'd say, complex or the most broad-based, and both strategic and tactical is option 1, and then it winnows down between 2 and 3. So this is sort of how we want to think about it. It's backwards from the weight of the organization. So the first one is to develop and implement, you can read along, national strategy leading to the widespread interoperable deployment of automation and emerging technologies. Chris, did you want to, is your comment about this particular statement or about the charge?
Oh, my comment was about the charge.
Okay, and yours was that it should be capped. Okay, so here, this one focuses on a coalition of both public and private sector stakeholders and organizations. Think about that. That's people, companies, agencies, and associations to develop and implement a unified national vision for automation, connected technologies, and serves as that voice for the transportation sector on transportation technology innovation. This national vision promotes safety, equity, there's our outcomes, by coordinating across regions, finding cross-industry consensus, including diverse stakeholders, sharing best practices, and promoting innovation and to accelerate deployment. So let's talk. What do you like about this? What don't you like? What would you change?
We consider looking at all of them first.
Okay, sure. Yeah, let's go to 2, and then we'll be taking notes on each. So 2 talks about developing and implementing a national strategy leading to, these first bullets all the same, Matt? No, they're different. Okay, what are you doing? Align and coordinate the missions between national organizations in order to establish a common purpose. This one focuses more across the organization, representative organization level, and working to align the national coalitions, the national associations, I think the word should be, and coordinate across organizations to develop a national vision framework that can be used to advance automated connected transportation technologies, to develop a national framework for deployment. And then you could always add the so that societal benefits and blah, 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 blah will happen. But this one is more about aligning the principles, interests, and missions of each of these organizations and understanding, first of all, everyone's focus, and coordinate across those organizations so that as organizations are working in this space, I would say, are bringing back to this table and having conversations and sharing best practices and thoughts on how to move this to a national framework. So there's that one. Matt, are you changing the option 2s or are you just putting them in the chat?
Just trying to put them in the chat
Okay.
so that people can grab them and perhaps
Okay.
put them in their own Word file. I meant to send this out before the meeting. I completely forgot to. I was going to have a
Okay.
Word
I was
file that
supposed to-
has these. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, I couldn't tell if you were changing them as you went. So then the third one is more of an inform and advance. So more of a table set for informing the state of the practice regarding automation and emerging technologies, building more specifically off the foundational work of the B2I Deployment Coalition to deploy technologies, establish infrastructure readiness framework, and share information, advance guidance, et cetera, at the national, regional, state, and local levels of government. I would say this is one that's most tactical, perhaps, and more specific to a swim lane, if you want to call it that. So those are the 3.
Yeah. So Paula, a quick observation. The third one specifically says vehicle technology. The first 2 say transportation technology.
Okay.
And previous when we first saw like the slide that had like the 3 buckets, and I wanted to bring this point up. It says specifically vehicles. And that I just need some clarification. I think that for me is a bit of a question / sticking point. Would the coalition be focused exclusively on vehicle technologies, or are we looking at a broader range of transportation technologies, which obviously vehicle would be a big part of, but that to me seems like a bit of a disconnect. Some places we say vehicle, other places we say more broadly transportation technology.
So I think that fits in the what don't you like category, right? I mean, I think I've heard you advocate for keeping it transportation oriented technology.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
I think so. And I think that's the hub.
Yeah,
We might have 8 of 10 spokes are vehicle. It's not to take tactical or work away from the vehicle side of things, but when I think of coalitions about bringing lots of folks together to advance overall purposes, and I think we would really alienate some folks if we said we only look at vehicle stuff, or
Yeah.
if that's it, or it needs to be a conscious decision if that's what we're going to do.
okay. Do we want to go back and discuss start at option 1 in order to capture some specific things, or do you want to give general thoughts about the 3 ranges? Because I think in the end, what we're trying to get to is one option that defines the depth and breadth of the coalition. And we're starting to talk about the swim lanes or the hub and spoke, and maybe all of this fits into a hub and spoke concept. But when we get down to defining a CAT coalition, there has to be a core table set of an organization, I would think, that is the steering body of the organization, regardless of who all participates. So if we could talk about that, give us your reactions to these three levels, or whether you have a different idea, quite frankly. Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with almost everything that's been said. Let me unraise my hand just in case I forget. One of the things, just a nitpick thing, I would put in front of wherever it says deploy or widespread deployment, I would put safely, because the regulators always look for that word, safely deploy.
Mhm.
And I think the overarching messages are really good. I mean, we have billions of reasons to back these thoughts about the safe and widespread deployment of these technologies. I agree with the transportation comment as opposed to vehicles. And the other thing I would put in there, and I'm not sure where, but this is just a general thought, is in creating these coalitions and aligning the coalitions, we have to be able to influence the appropriate regulators, both state and federal. So I'm not sure if there's somewhere in there we could say that.
How would you delineate that between state and federal?
Well, I mean, one of our issues, just stepping back, is we're ready. We're basically ready to test and deploy automated vehicles. Cruise, our partner that we own in San Francisco, has a vehicle called the Cruise Origin with no pedals, no steering wheel, ready to go. We have to apply for FMVSS exemptions, and we get 2,500 exemptions to put it on the road. It's going to take our petition for the exemptions is going in probably this week, and it'll take up to 2 years to get that back, to get those exemptions. And the process is just too slow. So, and we're trying to get this AV legislation passed, which would help a ton, which would inform the regulatory regime at NHTSA, et cetera. So the goal of all this is to make the decision makers aware that both industry, the associations, DMVs, local governments are all aligned, and that we want to, as quickly as possible, test and deploy these safe technologies that will not only make people's lives better, but will save lives and has all these societal benefits and et cetera.
Good. Yeah, so that's a great distinction. Thank you. Chris, your hand's up.
Thanks, Paula. Yeah, I appreciate you walking through all three first to get a sense for the differences between each of them. I wanted to offer some general perspective here. First, let me say, I know how hard this work is. Like, it's very difficult to take all of these different data points, Matt, to distill some themes between all of them. But I do want to be a bit critical here, and I apologize for that. I feel strongly we're going in the wrong direction with these three options. They're so general. And I think we are hearing from the folks that have been involved, as well as the folks that charged us, to be bold and start to be specific. And with each of these, I cannot distinguish how this would be any different than Connected Vehicle Pooled Fund Study, ITS America working groups, AASHTO working groups as well. We're just not being unique or specific enough, and we don't have, in my mind, a good reason to gather these various industry groups together. I think the data that was collected is very valuable, especially on this one as an example. We were told to inform in advance. Well, let's be specific around what needs to be informed and what needs to be advanced by bringing this group together to address gaps that we have in the industry. One of our challenges is we have this chicken and egg problem, right? We have automotives that have not adopted and deployed because of a seriously intense regulatory uncertainty environment.
and we have infrastructure owner operators who've been hanging roadside units in the connected vehicle world, but they're not talking to anything. And so I would love to see the CAT Coalition, like maybe the right answer for us is to be bold and specific to the point of being tactical with real deliverables. Because otherwise with these very broad statements like we have with option 1 through 3, we're not different than connected vehicle pooled fund study, ITS America, et cetera.
And we don't want to take the place of those groups.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking for a coalition that does what? Can you give an example of a specific statement that recognizes everything you said? I think you're right. I mean, these all start sounding the same as you read them. But how would you word it? Give a suggestion.
I would be happy to take a stab at that offline when I can have like some thinking time. I certainly can do that because this is hard work. Like I said, you all came up with great ideas, trying to distill a lot of different inputs here. But I think the way that I might go about it is like, what are the gaps in the industry as it relates to connected and autonomous? Jonathan mentioned one of them, the slow regulatory approval process.
Yeah.
How do we bring these groups together to address those gaps? To try to give you, like, if we start with the deliverables, I bet you we can distill a valuable statement from there. So a couple examples of deliverables. We have a big challenge with the management of what applications can be deployed and supported by both the automotive community and the infrastructure owner operator community. We have dependencies on each other. And I think one of the successes of this CAT Coalition was that IO OEM group, where we got real specific around like what would the OEM support and what would the infrastructure owner operator support. So I could imagine a deliverable like, it's kind of similar to something happening in ITS America, but a deliverable around like the agreed upon deployed applications by this time frame. You know, almost SPAT challenge-esque, but like more actionable. And then on the autonomous side, you know, we've seen a lot of activity around this in Europe. There's a whole host of telematics data that's out there in the world. And Europe, as an example, requires automotive companies to deliver hazard information from telematics. So Ford shares all of their event hazard information in Europe as part of a European Commission regulation. I think IOOs and automotives could find some common ground there, as well as technology companies and telecommunication companies. So it's almost like we could create a problem statement around that. And this coalition could bring together ideas to address those types of problem statements. And so I fully understand that my points here may derail this specific exercise, and I apologize for that. But I wonder if we don't get tactical for a moment in one of these sessions and we brainstorm as a team deliverables that people want out of the CAT Coalition, and then distill that into a purpose statement.
Matt he has a specific question about hazard information. Chris, you mentioned.
Oh, sure, Matt, I can drop the link in the chat. So when Ford has a crash on one of their vehicles, they're required by the European Commission to share the location of that event hazard, that crash. That's just one example of an event. There's other types of events too.
So I wonder, just throwing something out there, if it would help to be very specific about defining this centralized coalition, the table. I keep calling it the table, but to me it's a steering body of some group of people, to include these 3 associations and more, that their chore or their mission is to identify and remove barriers, or establish, identify specifically barriers, and work to remove them by assigning or collaborating with one of the other parts of the spoke, like ITS America may take on that challenge to do that specific work, of whatever these barriers are, or there may be an AASHTO barrier, or it may be a auto innovators task. I mean, it seems like we need to define specifically what I feel like we might go down a rabbit hole if we start trying to identify all the problems in connected and automated technology. But I hear what you're saying, because I think all three of these are very sort of muddled together, and recognize that this all happened over 24 hours where we tried this approach. So I think it's worth refining, but I'd like to hear what others think about Chris's suggestion and a way to get this to a specificity that's necessary.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge again, I am sorry to be critical.
No, it's
because I
not.
recognize how hard this is and how fast you all have been working.
Hey, and sometimes you just got to say it out loud because everybody's thinking it. So thank you. King.
I think one of the strengths of the coalition up to this point has been each entity, whether it's an organization or even federal highways, when they were developing a product of some kind, it was like a place where they could air the product before it was released and have other stakeholders help to improve on it. And so I appreciate what Chris was saying, that, and earlier the comment was, we don't want to duplicate what other existing organizations are already doing. So in line with what Chris was talking about, yes, we need to have a broader vision, because otherwise why spend time on any of this? But in terms of identify, a place where barriers can be identified and resolved, a place where gaps in the technology or the application can be identified and resolved, and interdependencies where parties that are needing to cooperate can actually work it out. And there was so much learning through the SPAT challenge when the automakers told the IOO side, yes, signal phase and timing is great, but we also need the geometry of the approaches. And so that was a learning, and learning also in terms of each other's culture, or learning in terms of terminology differences. So I appreciate what Chris was saying, that we need something concrete. Otherwise, people come to the table, and then how do you keep them at the table?
Great point. Jeff, your hand's up, and then I think Kristen's is.
Yeah, I think you covered part of my point, because I've been sitting here since Chris made his points, trying to reflect on the beginning of the VITA-I deployment coalition, whenever that was, way back when. And there was a clearer what that we were trying to get to than there is now. And but the reason we thought we needed a coalition was to have a table where the different stakeholders could collaborate with one another, and to use that table as a vehicle for accelerating what we all could do by ourselves, but very inefficiently. And so that's what I think we need to capture. And what I'm struggling with is if we don't have a clear idea of the what the light is at the end of the tunnel that we're all trying to move toward, can we get there? Because when there isn't, that's when we start developing statements that sound kind of mushy. That we all agree to work together to do good stuff. And that's what I hear Chris saying we need to avoid, and I agree with that. I'm just not sure how we get there.
Kristen, go ahead and make your comment. Then I'm wondering, can someone react to whether maybe Chris is spot on, we should start identifying the challenges and then look upwards to see where we go from there. Kristen?
Paula, that's exactly what I was going to say. First and foremost, I really appreciate and respect Chris for speaking up, because I absolutely agree that is the right course of action. You cannot distill a vision or purpose statement until you have a better understanding of the goals you're trying to accomplish. And so my suggestion was going to be maybe pause this exercise, take some time for us all to think about. Chris already gave 2 great examples of things we could do. I know ITS America has some others that we could offer, and then we could kind of prioritize though, and then distill a purpose statement out of those. I really appreciate everyone's great thought leadership today.
And I think, Jeff, you highlighted the notion of the purpose of the coalition. The coalition will not be a deployment group. That's left to others. The coalition will not take action as a body other than do certain things. And that's perhaps what we need to identify. Julie?
I think, well, this is just how I would conceptualize it, because I'm not a technical person, but I think what Jeff has raised is, it's helping me find my words. I think a coalition is a table. That's what a coalition is. It's bringing viewpoints together to accelerate whatever it is we're going to do. And I think then Chris raises good points about what is it we're going to do, and those can be much more specific around whether they're challenges I'm just trying to say, I think there are a couple of things at play in a coalition. And I ran in Kansas Economic Lifelines, which was a bunch of contractors and communities and engineers and the DOTs, and a whole bunch of mess. And it was the table where we had those conversations and tried to advance transportation writ large. And we worked on different things, and every once in a while we'd all come together and work on something specific, but it was that convening part that's important. And so I would just offer that as a way to think about this coalition in a couple of different ways, not just in one dimension, but a couple of dimensions.
Anybody else want to have a thought? I think we should go back to, we've identified within this group and with the tri-chairs, the needs. Do you remember the needs, the what wasn't working? It almost got to some of these gaps or barriers. Matt, I wonder if we can look at that again, or if we want to just start with a fresh piece of paper about what the barriers are. But we've done some work on this. Perhaps we need to dwell on for a second what those gaps or needs were. Can you find those, Matt, from a previous slide deck?
Is that the challenges and barriers?
I think so. From the last meeting, we had them refined.
Oh, hang on one second.
Just for the webinar, I think we had them coalesce down to even more. And it was less about who was at the table, but as what was preventing full deployment of connected and automated technology.
It's coming up now. Hang on one second.
Does that work for people to sort of look through that and see if maybe we want to now with Chris's thoughts and framework, really highlight some of these key problems that could be solved through a coalition approach, or at least addressed?
This is one of, is this the one that you were talking about?
No.
Because there's also
it's this and the other slide you had. There's some good information in both of those things.
Yeah. This is the less distilled version.
Yeah. So Chris, one thing that you mentioned I wrote down was the slow regulatory process.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a list we'd have to come up with. I was very quickly off the top of my head trying to give a couple examples, and Jonathan had just spoken about that one. That might be something a coalition of federal, private, public, can start to tackle together. But I think that's the key here, right? Why are we bringing these folks together?
Yeah.
And what do we hope that their collective minds and perspectives can better tackle together than they could in the vacuums of their own, individual organizations or sector.
And I would say for the purposes of what we're talking about right now, it's less about how the CAT was structured that we're trying to fix and more about so what is it we're trying to achieve as a coalition. So kickstart, that's that rapid thing. I'm kind of looking through here. USD vision. I mean, this isn't a lot more words.
I was going to offer too, Paula, those that throw stones should be the first to sign up for follow-up action in my view. So
yes, I like that too.
If it would be valuable, I think our next meeting is March 4th. I can certainly dedicate some time to get more specific thoughts down on paper that maybe I could send at least a week, if not more, in advance for everyone to chew on. That could help with this. I just want to offer time since I'm stones.
Matt, what are your thoughts? I mean, we've talked earlier this morning about the getting to the next meeting, which is going to be at the AASHTO Washington briefing. And the first function there is to brief the tri-chairs. So what we were hoping to be able to do with them is get to a point where we have a pretty well refined concept and purpose statement, and get their feedback from there. So whatever we do as homework, I was going to suggest should be pretty rapid so that staff has some time to craft some things for you to react to before that March 4th meeting.
I would concur.
Okay. So perhaps what we can do, send this out to the group. Kristen had a good idea. Then ask for you to give us specific feedback on barriers and any thoughts on how to define a purpose statement for a coalition that is not so long that we lose people in it, but that is specific enough to address what it is we're trying to achieve and what the purpose of this coalition would be. And from there, I think we can start posing some concepts of how this, for you to react to as well, but is it a hub and spoke concept that has clear definition of who might do what, but what the table, the platform of the coalition does and is about, that we can then figure out who should be sitting at that table. I think that when we learned there were 200 or so or more people on the previous CAT coalition membership list, it was kind of shook our head, and it was much more voluntary participation. But should there be some defined membership and structure around that core group? Is it a steering committee? Is it a whatever you want to call it? But that structure, I think, needs to be specific in order to have accountability, to have deliverables, and to achieve its purpose. Anybody disagree with that? Or have different thoughts? Okay, so we'll send these out and give you some ideas on what we'd like back in the form so that we can quickly coalesce those thoughts and get something then back out to you to react to on this topic. Could we, any comments? I'm reading the comment. Matt, yes, okay. We'll figure out how to do that in a way that's not too painful for you to react to. How's that? Matt, on our original slide deck, he's giving you the folder. Oh, and he's putting these in the shared folder. I apologize that we're a little disjointed. I feel like we're in this place where we need to build something that's meaningful. And again, Chris, I think your comments were spot on. That we need to have something that we all say, yeah, that looks right. And that feels right. Coalition building is challenging. Yes, it is. And this is, wait till you set a table of 50 people that want to wordsmith. I mean, that's the fear that I have, is you get too big that perhaps then it's really hard to orchestrate. And remember, in the end, I think one of the goals is to find a purpose and need and deliverable opportunity that Federal Highways US DOT says, yeah, we would like to have that kind of work go on, and we want to support it financially, even though we say we don't necessarily have to go to US DOT. But when you have funding and you have support from the government, federal government, you have that link to actually get some things done and make those connections. So I think that's probably the goal that we're on.
So do we want, so this ends in about a half hour. Do we want to talk about participants and players that we had on the agenda, or what's the, I mean, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves if we delve into that. So I don't know what the pleasure of the group is. Yeah.
Could we talk about pros and cons of the hub and spoke concept, or what that actually looks like? I keep using my hands to shape, something that looks like something in the middle.
So Paula, I don't think like we're on, I don't think this is Venus and Mars too much. I think this would be the way I might say it, is the purpose of the coalition is to bring stakeholders together to, insert Chris actions. So I think it's both. It's the purpose of the coalition, first and foremost, is to bring, and it's building off what Jeff said, is to bring stakeholders together, and we can list who those various stakeholders are. Two, and that's, I think, that's then the next thing. I think the purpose is, if we don't see our purpose is to bring the stakeholders together to collaborate and share all the first things that were on that in the first bucket from Matt. I mean, I don't think these are in conflict. I think it simply says the purpose is to get us together, stakeholders together, and then do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's why I keep kind of pushing hard about the bring us together, not to work in silos, to benefit from each other, the strength of each stakeholder's body to push forward whatever it is we're trying to do. I guess my concern is if we say the purpose is to insert Chris actions, we've skipped over the value and the power of getting stakeholders together to push in a fairly unified direction. So I'm not sure that those are in conflict. I just think it's important to talk about the value we see in stakeholder engagement. And so
that's why you're a professional communicator, Julie. So thank you.
So I don't think they're in conflict. I'm just pushing really hard to say, I think we have to recognize the value of the stakeholders.
Yeah, no, I think that's as a primary function of what a coalition can do. Matt, is that you typing? Can you go to the slide where we had some lines drawn through? I'd like to get some reactions. I don't remember what number it is because we moved things around. Okay, yeah, that back there. So could we get some reaction in the time, some of the time we have left, on consensus around not necessarily who should be at the table, because we feel like that's getting ahead of ourselves, but what we've heard from all of the sources that we've talked to so far, the webinar, the tri-chairs, and I think what we've inferred from this group, but I want to check this. Is the coalition a formal group versus an informal group? Do you agree or disagree? We think we're hearing formal. In other words, it's an actual structure that's defined, that has leadership, that isn't necessarily a, hey, y'all come to the table, we're having a meeting. Anybody that wants to walk in and sit at the table. Can I get a reaction on that? I'll just forecast all three of these. Organization versus individuals. The concept that it's the organizations that represent many individuals. So in other words, association type or organization versus individual people who might have a specific ideology or mission or role versus agencies. What do y'all think as you think about how the coalition, and I would say just the core coalition steering committee. I keep going back to that term, but I don't know if that's what it would be called, but whatever that table is, that's the governing body of the coalition. If it's a hub and spoke, who's in the hub? Who are the seated kinds of people? What are your reactions to that?
Well, Paul, I guess my first reaction I saw is it's definitely formal. If this isn't formal, I think this loses its validity right off the bat. So
Okay.
I think that, to me, that's an easy one, at least, and let others speak. Organization versus individual. Again, I don't think we want to get down to individual levels and the changing that occurs there. I think we need to represent organizations, and so it doesn't change by an individual's needs or wants. It's more their organization to stay more consistent. And an association versus agency, I guess I'm confused by that a little bit. So what the difference, or you're talking about agency as in a state DOT in a county level, or versus a ITE or something, or are you talking about something else?
So Gary, I can answer that one. So it'd be like AASHTO versus a member versus the state of Virginia or the state of Washington. It would be AMPO representing the MPOs versus a specific individual MPO. Or, if from the private sector, it'd be the auto innovators versus, Ford, GM, or something like that.
Thanks, Julie.
And then Kristen has her hand raised. I think, I'm not sure if Julie was waving or what, but.
Julie was saying she has to go get on a weather call.
Okay.
Kristen?
Yeah, I'm not sure it needs to be and either or. I think there does need to be a few things that I'm seeing in recommendations for the new coalition is you do need some sort of advisory leadership structure, absolutely, and that can't be large. But we also need the executive leaders and the practitioners that are doing the work on the ground who are learning how the technology works. So it needs to be association representation as well as the agency or the individual within that agency doing the work. Because I can share one thing coming from someone who used to be the person installing these technologies, and now I'm in a national level where very few people have actually been doing this day in and day out. There is a gap of knowledge and understanding. So we need leaders who are executives who can drive momentum forward and you leverage their traditional leadership skills while also making sure we make space for the practitioners that are doing this work on the ground and have a much more sophisticated understanding of the technology.
And that they find a home for themselves in this place. Yes.
And I also, may I, Paula, I will share that as someone who used to be a member of the coalition, it felt very invite only and very exclusive. So whatever this membership is, we need to make sure it's inclusive, people feel belonged, and that we have a goal to have diversity across the membership.
Very good. Thank you. So while I said it was like a y'all come table, it really wasn't. Jeff.
Yeah, I think the way I think about it is that and which you all may not agree with is you want to have if you think about who might be the members, you want to have the associations be the members, but with a charge to bring the individuals and the agencies to the table. Because I don't think you want a group that, where all 50 state DOTs can join as individual agencies. That doesn't make any sense,
right,
to me. But you do want AASHTO to be at the table and bring the individuals and the agencies that make sense for whatever the charge is.
And so, for example, if there was a member, core member, whatever we're calling the central table, the steering body, they should represent an association, even if they're a member of the association would represent not just their special interest, but the association in general. Is that
Right.
Is
Right.
that, yeah?
Right.
Okay. Chris?
Which is sort of the structure we have now.
Okay.
I mean, it's sort of the structure of the existing coalition, even though there's more, as we found out with the 800 person list, there's more attendees than there were members.
Yeah, like the tri-chairs are each representing their organizations
Right.
and their members, and also some of them wear two hats, right? They're members of several groups.
Right.
Chris?
A couple thoughts that, so first off, I wanted to offer, in case it's helpful, like, I think by the end of next week, if it'd be valuable to the group here, I could try to distill these thoughts into like a concept paper and send it out to all of us by the end of next week to consider. And I would try to take that as far as like a purpose statement, a draft purpose statement, or a few of them. And with that, I'm sort of thinking about two things. Like, we have gaps and problem statements today that we need to tackle and that this coalition could take action on. We also will have an evolving list of gaps and problem statements. So one of the functions of this coalition could be to review and prioritize what we're going to work on next, or to facilitate the input and the collection of those gaps and challenges. So that's kind of where I would be trying to go with this concept. And then I love the hub and spoke idea. And I wonder if it's CAT Coalition as the hub with associations as the spokes, 5GA, ITSA, ASHTO, ITE, USDOT, Auto Innovators. And those associations would put forward the representation for the main CAT Coalition group and any subgroups. Another way to do it is to pull from those associations and assemble the hub as CAT Co and the spokes as technology company, policymaker, auto company, deployer, implementer, whatever it may be, more of a role-based hub and spoke rather than an association-based hub and spoke.
Yeah, I think both of those are great concepts worth discussing. And it feels like when there's specificity on that, it's going to help make the purpose and function clear. And Kristen had a point about organizational or association staff. And then, wait, how are you saying this, Kristen? Association staff and organizational staff affiliation. What does that mean?
So I just think we need to distinguish, right? Like, just because we bring in 5GAA, right? They might choose to bring in their staff. But I would argue, to the points we've heard, we need both the organizational leadership and the representatives, their members that are doing this work, right? So for example, today I'm here representing a broad ITS America membership as staff, but Chris here is the innovator representing the actual industry experience. So I do recommend that there's some sort of model where you can have that complement from organizational affiliations.
And then a clear understanding of which organization is performing or doing certain functions that lead towards achieving the goal. Because in some cases, it may be ITS America says, we're going to do all of this to address this gap, and we'll bring back our results to discuss at the main table, you know, for that collaboration and sharing and information. Yeah, I like that, Chris. So I think we're kind of zeroing in on the consensus around how to describe, and I think we've heard some good thoughts, so thank you on that. And then I don't think we can do this today, but the lingering questions as we define our purpose will be these questions down below. Who all would need to be, and Chris had a list that sounded good. How large of a coalition, and then defining where do the technical folks have a role in this, as Kristen mentioned, and what level of involvement. I'm not sure what we mean by that, Matt. just how it's orchestrated, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But-
to me, it's the points that we have brought up where the association is the member, but they're going to bring their subject matter experts to actually participate, you know, in various aspects and to sort of what extent.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's what I was thinking of when I kind of wrote that question.
Hey, Paula,
Oh, yeah, Tracy?
King has his hand up.
Yeah, I just saw that. Hi, King.
Yeah,
Okay.
so going along with the metaphor of a hub and spokes arrangement and taking on the first of Chris's notions of the spokes being the organizations, I think the other thing that should be part of that hub and spoke concept is that when an issue arises to be resolved or a matter needs to be collaborated on, that there would be subgroups that would be, again, some kind of a spoke out temporary working groups to deal with that specific task. Because I don't think the hub's going to deal with it. I think the hub can decide who needs to play in resolving the particular issue or matter. And then the working group of the technical experts can be spun off and still be, you know, at any given time, we may have 5 of those working spokes.
Well, yeah, and the other option Chris described was more that each spoke was sort of a focused topical area that multiple people, you know, are connected to, not just by association. So both of those models are interesting to explore.
And the hub may only be a limited number of organizations represented, whereas the spokes can be 3-4 times that many, depending on the scope of the coalition.
Sure, and in many cases, based on the topic, can be self-volunteer, you know, kind of collaboration and efforts. I think, yeah, that makes sense. Other thoughts? Anybody? Okay. Matt, do we want to kind of look at our calendar? Oh, wait, what's Chris saying? Chris, go ahead and role-based automotive technology innovator, IOO. Well, I wonder if there's, oh yeah, there we go. I was going to say policies.
Yes, great point, Kristen.
Folks, add to the chat. Chris is getting good ideas here. Matt, do you want to talk about our schedule and just sort of figure out between now and March 4th what needs to happen?
Sure. I think where we are is squarely in the storming phase of team development. So
I wrote that on my pad.
Yeah. No, we're getting to norming, I think, hopefully. So we are February 14th, the week of. So we've had this meeting number 3. The next one is on March 4th. It's a Friday. That's the next scheduled meeting that we have. It'll be a hybrid. So those that want to travel or can travel to the AASHTO Washington briefing, and it's happening at our offices, not the hotel that the Washington briefing is occurring at. But we'll have many of our state DOT leadership here, so that's why we're kind of combining it a little bit. The plan is to have it from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. With sort of the part A, the check-in with the CAT Coalition tri-chairs, have them more involved, discussion with them from 10 to 12. Have a lunch, we won't forget about lunch, and then from 12 to 4 have more of a working session, alternative I think what we're talking about here is kind of going to have to be revamped, so don't worry about the actual words that come after for the different meetings at this point. If you, and I will send out this information, I think I've received some from you who are going to be able to travel. If you are one of the ETF members and you want to travel, we can reimburse you for travel expenses. That's not a problem. Pat, again, I will send out some information about this, but you essentially purchase your airline tickets and make your hotel reservations, and then you get reimbursed for that. And we have some guidelines for that, but it's nothing, crazy or anything. It's typical travel reimbursement, but you have to pay for those up front and then you get reimbursed for them. But we will also have the hybrid component. So we will have the virtual connections. And I think for our kickoff meeting back in January, that worked pretty well. So we'll be in the same space for that here at the AASHTO offices. And then, you know, on down, I will be, I did the Survey Monkey or the Doodle survey for meetings 5 through 7. And I will get those scheduled later this week. And then following, you know, in May is when we're trying to sort of, you know, get this information out. So we'll have an organizational staff check-in sort of meetings the week of May 2nd, and then we'll have our last meeting. This is the plan will be during the AASHTO spring meeting. Again, hybrid setup, but if you want to attend that in person and participate, again, we can cover your travel expenses for that. So, are there any questions from anybody? Especially with like logistics, if you're going to be traveling, any concerns about reservations or anything? I see everybody's chatting and not paying attention. That's fine. It's a class.
Do you have a specific hotel that you would recommend or anything like that near your?
Yeah, so if you're not going to the Washington briefing, I wouldn't recommend that hotel because it's kind of on the other side. It's 12 blocks away from the AASHTO office. If you need some, we moved here 2 years ago, and then 6 weeks later we were, you know, in COVID. So I don't know the specific hotels around us, but there's the Marriott, the downtown Marriott, which is near the AASHTO offices. I will send out our address, and you can kind of use that to pick and choose which hotel you want to go to.
Hey, this is Pat. Yeah, I'll send detailed travel reimbursement directions by the end of the week for anybody who's interested.
Do you want to just send it to the entire task force? And
oh yeah, yeah. I'll send it to everybody, and then you can decide if you know you're going to use it or not.
And just let us know beforehand if you're going, just so we can, not because you have to get permission, but we just want to know from an accounting perspective.
In which way you'll be coming, because we'll need to make sure we know who's on video that day. Yeah. So, Chris, I'm very happy that you're going to work on this. I'm trying to figure out, do you want to have a follow-up call with a staff group, or do you want to draft something and work with Kristen? I see you two collaborating on the chat. What works best for you to be able to get something down on paper? Do you want to put something down first and then try and get a reaction?
Yeah, I'd be happy to commit to having something circulated. You know, I can just send it to staff first, or I can send it to the whole group here by the end of the day on Friday next week. I wish I could do it sooner, but I don't think that I can.
So when you say next week, are you thinking the 25th?
That's right. Yeah, I could have something out to everybody by the 25th. Ideally, you know, we could try that async for sort of feedback, or we could consider going for the March 4th update with like, this is where we're at. We're actively considering these types of things. I would also encourage us, like once even we collaborate on something, it would be kind of great to reach out to a few of folks, you know, that may have responded to that webinar survey, like test our idea a little bit out there in a very, very small group, and then bring that back. But perhaps with this timeline, March 4th turns more into a progress update and less of a, here's our purpose statement. If everyone happens to like love what I put out there, then great, maybe that's it, but I doubt that will be the case.
Yeah, a focus group or some kind of outreach. What that will do, and I guess I would ask the staff of the 3 association here, if we come back to the tri-chairs on that meeting and discuss options we have on the table for reaction, is that good enough? I mean, I think it's whatever it is. They're asking us by May to come to a recommendation, but if it's still in the draft stage, is that okay? What's your reaction, Matt, Jeff, Tracy, Kristen?
I don't have an strong opinion one way or the other, but I think it's fine.
Maybe we talk them on next week on the check-in, just to give them a sense of where we are and get their concurrence.
I think this is fantastic. I think this is the conversation we've needed to have as a coalition for a long time. I appreciate everyone's engagement, because I think, you know, progress, not perfection, right? We're not going to have everything defined for our leadership and other national stakeholders, but showing them that we're really trying to talk about challenging issues in coalition building is really important. So I really appreciate everyone's leadership here. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, you raise a good point. The whole basic principle of being transparent and getting feedback and not working in a silo. We had several people on the webinar ask, how can we follow along and pay attention to what the task force is doing? And so people are very interested in how this is shaping up, and there needs to be some kind of feedback loop continuously, not just for what work this group is doing, but also as the coalition forms and does its work. That's got to be a core principle. Okay. Any questions about the schedule? Meetings 5, 6, and 7 will still be scheduled, but the end goal, remember, is the May 11th meeting with at the AASHTO spring meeting to report into the tri-chairs with a final recommendation.
So Paula, for scheduling purposes, how long of a meeting do you think we would need at the spring meeting?
I would suggest we do it like what we're doing for the Washington briefing, 2 hour, you know, sort of a break it up into a 2 hour, then a 4 hour kind of thing, sort of a working meeting.
Well, yeah,
Or maybe half a day, 4 hours total at most.
It almost feels like the May 11th meeting is a wrap-up meet. You aren't still making decisions there because you're also reporting to the tri-chairs. It's wrapping up the recommendations, the formal recommendations, right?
Right.
I think where King is going for our planning purposes, like
Yes.
how much time do we need in a room? I would say no more than a half day, either morning or afternoon.
Who's in that room? Is it the tri-chairs again, or is it?
Or do we bring the whole task force?
Well, yeah, for sure it was a task
Oh,
force.
yes, yeah. I think it's the task force, and then if the tri-chairs want to join, they're more than welcome to join. I think they'll all be there.
No, this is for the tri-chairs, right? At the spring meeting, that's, as Paula was saying, that's when the recommendations come out.
I thought it was so that Scott could report to the board of directors meeting on Friday on the resolution, you know, at least on the recommendations. I don't know, maybe we should sort that out with them on their expectations. Jeff?
Yeah, I'm with you. I thought the meeting in May was going to be the task force presenting their findings and recommendations to the tri-chairs. And then Scott was going to talk to the board, the AASHTO board later in the week.
Yeah.
If the idea is that this group is finished with its work and is presenting to the tri-chairs, I don't think it's a half-day meeting either. I think it's a couple hours.
Mm-hmm.
Again, reason I'm asking now is that planning for space is happening now.
Right.
Well, maybe reserve 3 hours. And
Okay.
if not all needed, we don't need it.
All right, let me find out when the windows are, because we're gonna have to shoehorn this in.
Okay, it's Wednesday, the 11th.
Okay.
Matt, I'm looking to you. What's left on our slides?
That was it, kind of. The next one here is just the closing.
Ah, there we go. Well, we have a lot of action and next steps to do. It wasn't exactly on the path that we thought we were going to be on, but I do think we're in a better place at the end of this meeting. So I'm very excited to read Chris's input and then have everybody react to and help shape, refine that direction. I don't know, Matt, what, we're going to have to figure out how much more do we delve into and spend time on the other organizational models? Or are the few that have been mentioned in the chat today some that we dive into quickly?
Yeah, I think we regroup on Monday, you know,
Yeah.
when we have our staff meeting and just digest some of this and talk about it. King has it, you have your hand up.
Again? Or
Yeah,
still- okay.
I just want to echo what Kristen said earlier. I very appreciate the task force members for their participation. As a national staffer, I try to refrain from interjecting too much. But I think especially Chris, appreciate Chris's thought leadership in framing this in a way that makes it manageable. So thank you, everyone.
Matt, will you be sharing notes from this meeting?
Somehow, yes. But,
Yeah, my only
um,
thought is remember who's not here. We had several members leave early and there were a few that weren't here at all.
So I recorded it, and Tom Kern was on vacation, but he's
Right.
gonna want to listen to this anyway. So let me get with Tom to sort of see if he's gonna listen to this anyway, just to hear the discussion, because we can't, I mean, even with our notes, I can't capture exactly what was.
Kristen took notes, so will you share those with Matt, Kristen?
You
Okay.
can't hear me nodding, Paula? Yes, I'm gonna email them that.
Sorry, I should be watching you, not listening. Nod louder. Okay, well, what time is it? We're 5 minutes early. Look at all we accomplished. I would say stay tuned. Please watch your emails. Give us feedback as we ask questions. When we have our staff regroup, we'll refine what it is we're asking you all to do. And we look forward, Chris, to your suggestions. And if you need any help in the interim or want to do pre-drafts with the staff group, you know, that might be helpful, or whatever you need. So don't hesitate to ask.
Will do. Yeah, as soon as I have something kind of tangible down on paper, my plan is to start to share it, and I can use the shared drive for that, I think, Matt.
Yeah, you should be able to post it there.
Perfect.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you all for your perspectives and your input, and we'll get there. I'm an optimist. Okay, take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.